Do you actually manage relationships? It's a strange question, but often we find with many businesses that they say that relationships are important, and it's really important to actually engage with suppliers and customers and so on and so forth, and even internally within the organisation. But do you actually manage relationships? Supply chain management can be defined as the management of upstream and downstream relationships with suppliers, distributors and customers, in fact all the key stakeholders, to achieve greater customer value added at the least possible cost. So it's all about managing relationships. But the challenge we actually have is, if you think about managing anything, so if I'm looking at a supply chain and I'm managing inventory or managing stocks in that supply chain, I will generally have people who are dedicated to actually spending time to managing that inventory. I may even have information systems which are utilised to manage that inventory. I may even have assets like warehouses used for storing and managing inventory. The key thing though is, do we have that sort of dedication to managing relationships? Or do we just let relationships sort of happen by chance? One of the things that we find is some of the best practice organisations, those really good global organisations, they actually dedicate resource to managing relationships. They have processes in place to manage relationships. They put in infrastructure in place. It could be information systems infrastructure. It could actually be a physical building or office which is utilised to manage relationships. It could also mean that we need to have people dedicated to supporting the management of relationships. It also means that we need a different skill set. We need that emotional intelligence skill set, that relational intelligence. And we actually need to monitor and measure relationships. So do you have metrics in place to monitor relationships? What is your metric for whether this is a good relationship or a bad relationship? So there are quite a few approaches that we use, and myself and some of my doctoral students many years ago developed a process for actually monitoring relationships. This becomes really important if you're trying to manage relationships. Identify the ones which are good, identify the ones which are bad, and also then be able to actually move relationships to a whole new level. So during these times of COVID-19, I think it's really worth thinking about, what do you have in place to manage relationships? Because if we're going to manage relationships, we need to have those critical things there. As I said, supply chain management is all about the management of upstream and downstream relationships with all the key stakeholders to achieve greater customer value at less cost to the supply chain as a whole. As a procurement professional, it's your job to really think through the management of relationships. How do you do that? How can you actually get the organisation, a culture where relationships are seen as precious and they can actually be managed effectively as we move forward?